Hello. As you know, last week on Friday, I had to cancel class due to illness. Since then, I've received a few messages from students asking if I could provide some guidance towards the Anatomy 1500 final exam, and so I've put this video together here in order to provide an overview as well as some strategies for preparing for the final exam. So let's start with the final exam layout. Although I posted in a previous announcement, as the image shows, preparation is the key, and so I thought I'd start out with the layout here so that we can make sure that you're prepared as much as possible for what to expect. And so there will be 80 multiple choice questions on the exam, and those include the traditional answering the question out of the options A, B, C, D, but then it also will include the select all that apply questions like we've had on our previous tests. Additionally, there will be 4 short answer questions, each worth 5 points. We'll come back to these questions in just a moment. Overall, for the exam, you will have 2 hours and 20 minutes to complete it. Just to put that in perspective, we've had 55 minutes for each of our tests, with 45 multiple choice and multi-select questions. In this case, it's approximately double the number of questions and then a few short answer questions, and so we have more than doubled the time that was available to you on the test to allow enough time to get through the multiple choice, select all that apply, and short answer questions. Additionally, we've discussed that you're allowed to bring 1 cue card into the exam. That cue card must be handwritten. The cue card can be 3 inches by 5 inches at a maximum. Please follow this so that you don't end up with any added stress if you come in with a larger cue card, because it will be asked to be reduced to the 3 inches by 5 inches maximum. The cue card then must be submitted upon completion of the exam. When you turn in your scratch piece of paper, I will also collect the cue card. So let's discuss the short answer questions and some strategies for being successful with them. The first strategy is use learning outcomes for the course to study and prepare for the exam in general, including for short answer questions. Look through those learning outcomes to see what areas you need to review as you prepare for the exam, what things are maybe not as clear, and spend a little bit more time on those areas. But also use them to think about, what if this was a short answer question worth 5 marks, as I mentioned earlier, what would be the answer to that question, and use that as practice for preparing for the final exam. Because in the end, the questions for the short answer questions are coming from those learning outcomes. As much as the wording might be slightly different, we've pulled the short answer questions by looking at the learning outcomes for the course. As I mentioned, each question is worth 5 marks. And so put at least 5 points pertaining to the question. The 5 marks that we'll be looking for grading are related to 5 points to bring up about the answer to that question. As you go through answering the questions, organize your thoughts. Make bullet points at first within the space that's provided within the DC Connect test, and then convert those bullet points into sentences. This way, as it states here, you'll be able to organize your thoughts and then come up with more cohesive full sentences that are clear in terms of answering the question. Don't elaborate thinking it will get you more marks. The question is worth 5 marks. Put down at least 5 points pertaining to the question, but don't keep adding more information in, hoping to maybe say the right thing and get a little bit of extra points and so on for the question, because what I often find is that students actually elaborate too much and start saying things that are incorrect. And I just want to be upfront that marks will be removed as you start to say things that are incorrect. So you may very well give me the 5 points that are correct and then start to discuss further and add incorrect information not related to the question. That doesn't leave the response as a full mark response because you've provided too much, and some marks will be removed. So again, organize your thoughts, use bullet points, then convert them to sentences so your answer is very clear. If you're struggling a little bit, maybe use some of the multiple choice questions, because you might find a little bit of information that triggers your memory or even provides some information regarding that short answer question if maybe it's one that you're having difficulty answering. All of this comes down to also managing your time on the test, because you'll have time to be able to go and look at previous questions in the multiple choice area and so on. If there's a trigger back there that, oh, there was something that I wanted to say, if you are budgeting your time properly. One of the things that I might even suggest is maybe start by looking at the short answer questions at the beginning of the test, then going through the multiple choice questions, and then completing or even just adjusting the short answer questions as you get back to the end of the test. So let's look at a couple example questions to think about how to process through these questions. I will say these are not a wink, wink, nudge, nudge that you should study these questions specifically. I went and I pulled a couple of learning outcomes out of our course outline and created some short answer questions in order to look at some of these strategies together. So this first question says, distinguish between anatomy and physiology and explain how they're related, and describe an example. So if I were answering this question on a test, I would think to myself, what are the key things that I have to do here? And then write out in bullet points. Okay, anatomy is equal to structure. Physiology is equal to function. And then how they're related is structure dictates function. And then I'm allowed to come up with any example that's relating a situation in the body that relates structure to function. So I'm going to choose myosin and actin in the muscle because that's what's coming to mind for me. Well, now I have a little bit of a plan written out in the space on DC Connect where I'm answering the question, and then I can convert that into full sentences. So anatomy is the structure of the body, while physiology is the study of the function of the body. The anatomical structure of the various parts of the body dictate their function. And then in muscle cells, the protein myosin has cross bridges that branch off of it, the anatomy, that allows it to attach to and pull the actin when the muscle contracts, the physiology of muscle contraction. So then, as I mentioned earlier, the short answer questions are worth 5 marks. Thinking about it from my perspective as the professor, but as the student who's writing this response, I would say anatomy is the structure of the body. That's 1 mark. Physiology is the study of the function of the body. That's another mark. That's directly related to distinguish between anatomy and physiology. The anatomical structure of the various parts of the body dictate their function. Structure dictates function. That's how they're related. That's another mark there. And then for describing the example, I've mentioned that the myosin has this structure of cross bridges that branch off of it, and then how they interact or how they function related to actin. In this case, I've got to the point of the answer. I have 5 points related to the answer to the question, and so I therefore have more confidence that I've answered this question clearly and to the point, and also included 5 aspects related to the question so that I can get the 5 marks. Let's look at another question just as another example here. Maybe you have a question that says something along these lines, and again, this is not a wink, wink, nudge, nudge. I've pulled this out of the learning outcomes by looking at it and finding a learning outcome that could relate to 5 marks. In this case, it might be a little bit more clear. List the 5 different types of white blood cells and identify their specific function. As a student, I would think, well, there's the aspect of listing the 5 types of white blood cells, and then there's also the identify their specific function. So since there's 5 marks, maybe a half mark for each name of the white blood cell, and then a half mark that I've given their specific function as well. And so let me think through, what are the different types of white blood cells that I know? There are the basophils involved with inflammation because they release histamine and heparin. Eosinophils are involved with parasites. Neutrophils are phagocytes. So then those are the basophils that I remember from studying. And then there's monocytes that become macrophages, and then those are phagocytes as well. And then finally lymphocytes, the T and B cells that are related to specific immunity. Okay, well, I'm confident I have 5 points here. Half a mark for each of the names, and then a half a mark for their specific function. Let me convert that into a full sentence answer, and I end up with something like this. The 5 white blood cells are basophils, eosinophils, neutrophils, monocytes, and lymphocytes. Maybe a half mark for each of those. And then additionally, a half mark for each of the different functions that those cells have. Here's an answer that would give 5 marks out of 5 marks if this were the question. Because again, I've listed the 5 different types of white blood cells, and I've identified their specific function, as well as being to the point with the response. So as I mentioned before, sometimes I know the stress gets up and you maybe answer the question like this, but what if I'm wrong and this isn't quite it? And so let me just add a bit more information in there, and maybe I'll get some extra part marks in case something's wrong here. And I add a whole bunch more to the answer. And you can see I have and ... at the end because sometimes I've been there myself as a student. I've also had students do this on tests where continuing along and providing more information leads to incorrect information. So yes, there are granulocytes and agranulocytes that help fight infections, but those are categories under which the 5 types of cells fall. So you're not really adding any extra information there. So then in a way, it's partially a waste of time. But then, as you can see from the next sentence, antibodies are involved in bacterial infections along with plasma cells, and now you're starting to add incorrect information. Memory cells fight the infection later, and even though some of that is kind of right, it's not related to the 5 types of white blood cells and their specific function. So in terms of the short answer questions, again, don't add more information hoping for more marks. Use bullet points to list out the key points that you need to mention. Look for the 5 points that would relate to ultimately answering the question, and then convert them into clear, concise, full sentences that answer the question. I hope that this has given you some strategies to think through as you prepare for the test and as you practice for the short answer questions and so on. If there's any other questions that you have, please don't hesitate to reach out via email to me, and I will get back to you before the final exam during our time together in class. Good luck, and I will see you then.